and in a couple of minutes, we'll get started with our session. In the meantime, feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat bar. And we'll start at 2 minutes after. As you're jumping into this space to introduce yourselves, I would also invite you to drop in a word that comes to mind when you think of safety. Safety even beyond transportation. Just when you think of the word safety, what's a word that comes to mind? So feel free to drop those into the chat as well. Hello, and welcome to this session on investigating mobility, justice, and safety. I'm Barb Chamberlain, and I'm the director of the Active Transportation Division with the Washington State Department of Transportation. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm coming to you personally from the place that is now known as Olympia, Washington. Welcome to the Washington Bike Walk and Roll Summit. We're really excited to have you with us for a 5-day virtual event, and we're thrilled to have folks from so many communities around the state and beyond participating. We want to start with a land acknowledgement. This summit is virtual, and those participating join us from many lands. We acknowledge the land that the Cascade Bicycle Club headquarters sits on today as the traditional home of the Duwamish, Tulalip, Muckleshoot, and Suquamish tribal nations. If you don't know whose lands you're on, you can check the chat in a minute, and you'll find a link to a map you can use to look up your place on the land. Without these Indigenous peoples, we would not have access to this environment. We take the opportunity to thank the original caretakers of this land who are still here. We'd also like to note that we are recording this session and it will be available following the summit. The summit is hosted by Cascade Bicycle Club and Washington Bikes, two sister statewide organizations with a shared vision of bicycling for all. Cascade serves bike riders of all ages and abilities throughout Washington state, educating new riders, advocating for safe places to ride, and holding events and rides. Washington Bikes advocates for bicyclists' rights, endorses political candidates, holds officials accountable, and works to shape policies that will make bicycling safe and accessible for all. We want to take a moment to thank our sponsors whose collective contributions have enabled us to bring together 15 panels with expert speakers, with registration free for all attendees. Thanks to our sponsors, Amazon and the Washington State Department of Transportation. I'll now quickly introduce our session panelists and topics. We have a number of panelists because this is a breakout session, and so you'll have the chance to interact with a couple of these folks in whatever breakout room you end up in. So we have with us today Portia Shields with the Yakima Nation, Anna Zivverts, Disability Rights Washington, David Jones, Cooper Jones Active Transportation Safety Council, Will Hitchcock with the Washington State Department of Health, myself with the Washington State Department of Transportation, Patricia Hughes, also with the Cooper Jones Active Transportation Safety Council, and my colleagues Brian Wood and Charlotte Claybrook with WashDirect. You'll be joining leadership from the Cooper Jones Council in a conversation where we envision a more just and safer system for all. We're going to engage in a discussion around how we build the system, what barriers stand in our way, and how we mitigate those barriers to make mobility justice a reality. Our presentation format is we'll have some introductory remarks from David, and then we're going to break out into group discussion. And so you'll be assigned to randomly into facilitated breakout rooms. And then we'll come back together at the end for a final quick closeout. Additionally, all registrants were informed of a set of community norms in your welcome email. If you feel these agreements aren't being met or you're feeling uncomfortable, please direct message the folks who have an asterisk at the front of their name when you look at participants so we can assist. We're working to create brave spaces for conversations, and we'll maintain the standard of respect as well as a space for growth. We also greatly value attendee feedback. A Google feedback form will be posted in the chat at the end of the session and will also be included in an email at the end of the day. And with that, I want to turn it over to David Jones, and we'll have a quick tech shift here as I stop sharing my screen. And David starts sharing his with a few slides about the Cooper Jones Active Transportation Safety Council.
How do I get to this now, Mark? I'm going to share my screen.
Go down here.
Okay, at the
Yeah.
bottom of your slide
Yeah.
screen.
Present. Okay, do you see that now?
Yeah, and then switch into, no, I'm sorry, I was looking at my own screen.
Are we there yet?
No, how about if I present mine and I'll go into slide share? Just let me do that really quickly here.
How about this? Is it there now?
No, so
Barbara's doing it.
I should have my slides shared now, David. So if you want to go, somebody give me a thumbs up that we've got slides showing.
Where's mine now? Where's mine?
All right. So David, you're good to go ahead and start because I've got my slide showing.
Where's my Zoom though? Oh, it's there. It is. Here.
Live, David.
Okay, well, I'm technologically challenged, but this group, this particular session came out of discussions that we had at the Active Transportation Safety Council, which is a group that was created from separate bicyclist and pedestrian groups and that were merged by the legislature. So a big thanks, first of all, to Cascade, to the Bike Alliance, to the state. So our group, some of the members of the group were designated in the legislation that created the group. Others were added as we felt like we needed to make the group more inclusive and to include more voices. Minutes from our meetings, reports, they're available on the Traffic Safety Commission website, and that'll get shared in the chat if you want to look at that. This particular discussion, I think, started for us last spring when everything was locked down, and everyone noticed how different everything was, and it sort of started the discussion as a way to imagine what things might be if everything was different. And that's how we started thinking about what we really meant by the word safety. It's one of those words that everyone uses, but hardly anyone can actually define it, or it's defined by different people in many different ways. So it's also important, if safety is your goal, to know what you think that goal is. So we had a hard time trying to put it into words, but we have started that, and kind of what we're hoping to do is kind of steal some ideas from you for free today, rather than impose our ideas on you. But one of the things we talked about, and as a way to start it off, was safety is more than just not getting hit by a car. It has to mean more than that. That's just not good enough. So we realized that these kinds of discussions are also taking place across disciplines as well. And so we're not alone in trying to make a more holistic or a more complete definition of what it really means, what safety really means. And so that's kind of our goal today, is to hopefully inspire some discussion and get ideas from outside our own group that we can add to our own discussion. And then we have an executive summary, which we are going to add to this year's report to the legislature. And thoughts from today will probably go into a longer report that will be part of next year's report. And that will be, if we can make that executive summary available to you on the website as well. So are there any questions about that? And if not, we can head this back into the breakout rooms and get started. I don't want to take too much time talking about this, or I don't want to prejudice anyone's thoughts by giving you our thoughts already. So with that, I'm all done.
David, thank you for that. This is Barb. Thanks again, and thank you for flexing after I had to stop my screen share. That was my first Zoom bombing experience. It's not pleasant. So let's not let that cast a pall over our conversations, which are really essential ones. One reminder for you is to go ahead and post one word in the chat that comes to mind. Think about safety. Our goal was to show you a word cloud of that, and I think we might do that towards the end just to keep us moving and head into the breakout rooms. So what will happen is that you will be randomly assigned, you'll get an invitation to go into a breakout room. So watch for that, say yes to the invitation when you get there, and then we'll see you all back in this room in about 45 minutes. Thanks. For coming back. Thanks everybody for coming back together. I just want to double check that my screen is only showing my slide and no graffiti. It looks okay on my screen.
So good.
Thank you, Karen. That was such a startling experience. And I'm hoping we've got all the rooms back together now. I'd invite folks at this point. First, I want to say thank you. My own slide reminds me, thank you so much for participating in this on behalf of the Cooper-Jones Active Transportation Safety Council, which I am a member of. We haven't had this kind of an external participatory discussion before. We meet as a council, we are created by the legislature. There's a list of who's supposed to be on it, those kinds of things. And we're not really, I will say, fully funded and staffed for doing a ton of public engagement. But this seemed like such a great opportunity to have you participate in the kind of conversation we've been having, saying safety is a lot more than just not being hit by a driver. And so one of the things we'd like to know from you, and feel free to drop this into the chat or pop your hand up if you want to, is did you feel like this was the kind of conversation that we could have in more places, or that somebody could have, even if it's not the ATSAC, if it is other groups having this conversation? We know other folks are having this conversation, but how could we expand on this sense of what's possible and what the barriers are and how to take those barriers down? We enlist in our actions as our partners. So if you've got any reaction to what it was like to be in this conversation today, again, please drop that in the chat or pop your hand up. And we didn't plan to do a lot of formal report out from each room, but I will ask my fellow room facilitators if anything in particular struck you out of the conversation you had in your room, if you want to share anything. So that's Will and Anna and I'm trying to remember who, and David.
Barb, this is Anna. I can share.
Mm-hmm.
Great. I realized my mic is being a little quiet, so I'm trying to be loud here. There was a lot. We started out with a big focus on kids and youth, and I think that was exciting for me to hear as a parent. But just something to gave me a lot of hope and a lot of inspiration.
Thanks for that. We had some parent comments in our room as well, and in a couple of places, schools that don't let kids walk or bike. And so the school systems were 0 for 2 in our room. Will or David, any thoughts from your room? David?
I think we probably, my fault, got behind and didn't get all the way to the third section there. I might have missed a prompt, but I think the thing that because we spent a lot of time on how would it, the first part, how would it feel to you? And the word that I remember hearing more than once was spontaneity, the ability to be spontaneous and use whatever, be spontaneous and being able to move without having a heightened sense of sort of a hyper awareness of your surroundings. in the sense that you're hyper aware of threats to yourself because you're vulnerable when you're walking or riding or waiting for a bus, or when you're not surrounded in your personal vehicle. You have a certain amount of vulnerability, and it would be nice to be able to be spontaneous without having that heightened awareness of your vulnerability, that you are sort of constantly under threat in some way.
Yeah, Will.
Yeah, I think, being more, conscientious of the different diversity that we have across our communities, and making sure that we're doing a better job of having different perspectives and ideas at the table, and getting those to have that input. There's we always have a lot of things going on, and sometimes we cater to, and solve a problem for one group, but then we didn't necessarily consider how it might have impacted the others. And so thinking about that is, was kind of one of the themes that we heard through ours.
Mhm. Great, thanks. And I'm seeing some good additional suggestions in the chat. We will save all of these. We'll take them back to our ATSAC meetings. We will be doing an executive summary of this conversation around what do we mean by safety in our report to the legislature that goes in this year. And it's funny to do an executive summary before the full paper, but we've been having a lot of conversations. So we want to at least tee up the idea that we are discussing these concepts of these broader questions. And then we'll continue to have the conversations as an ATSAC and write a longer white paper that would be then out next year. And I'm going to ask one of my counterparts to drop our link into the chat, if you would, for getting to the Active Transportation Safety Council page. Maybe Brian can find that, or Pat, so that you've got that to know where our old reports and white papers and that kind of thing are saved. And also, again, if you've got thoughts for this kind of conversation, where should this be happening, so that we can encourage other folks to host this, or we can connect into it and learn from the conversations they're happening about what makes them feel less than safe on the street, so that we make it safer for all of us together. And I will say there was a nice bookend that came out of our room, which was one participant talking about organizing an open streets event based on this morning's presentation. And if school districts won't let kids walk or bike to school, then we need open streets events on the first day of school. So everybody does a bike train or a walking school bus or something, so that the school districts can actually see that this is in fact possible. This is the final session for today. Tomorrow morning, we'll have a session on equity and the future of our urban rail transit systems at 8:30 Pacific Standard Time for an hour. And then, as you know, we've got sessions all week, morning, noon, and afternoon, so you can break up your day beautifully. And I like the quote that Pat just dropped into the chat: provide point-to-point services so we don't have to Mary Poppins our way across town.
I knew you'd like that. Barb, would you like me to share the word cloud?
That would be great. Yes,
I have it
close
ready
on
to
that.
go. Can you stop sharing yours?
Oh, yeah.
Can everybody see that?
Oh, nice.
What we're looking at is the two biggest words are freedom and accessible. That means those were mentioned several times. And then we have smaller words that were probably each mentioned once or twice, including continuity, peace of mind, attention, stressless, easy, vulnerable, secure, calming, child safety, prevent crashes, and maximizing margins. And of course, the top two again were freedom and accessible. So that was fun to do. Thanks for participating in that.
Yeah, and what a great note to close on, that we want to have accessible spaces that give us all freedom. Thanks again, and we'll see you in the future sessions.